Good evening. So tonight's topic is one that I've been meaning to talk about for a while, but just never seemed to get the time to do. So now is the night. We're going to talk about gout. So how about gout? Well, what is it and why is it such an important topic for everybody? Well, gout is something that's affected mainly by gentlemen. Seems to be a little bit more common in that population. And it can be a very painful condition that is characterized by usually the big toe gets hot and swollen. Very, very painful condition. And it has to do with the body that is unable to metabolize uric acid very well. And so there are some risk factors for gout. It is very common in adulthood and rare in children, mostly adult men, as mentioned, starting between age 30 and 45, and occasionally in women where it tends to start after age 55. Regardless of gender, for all folks older than 65, gout seems to be a little bit more common across the board. And they're saying that gout affects about 4% of adults in the United States. And so there's a lot of things that are going on that can be increasing the risk of getting gout. As you might have noticed, there is an obesity epidemic, as it were, across the country. High blood pressure, chronic kidney disease, injury, and occasionally fasting can also increase the risk of gout. Excessive amounts of alcohol on a regular basis. So we're talking about risk factors for developing gout. And in particular, beer, whiskey, gin, vodka, and rum seem to be the named ones that are particularly at risk of triggering gout. Overeating kind of goes along with the obesity, as mentioned in the beginning, and large amounts of meat, seafood, and beverages containing high fructose corn syrup. So that's pretty much many of the beverages available in our common market. So combining a fast food diet, which has a lot of this stuff, with a soda is a good way of having a gout attack. So, and the people that have actually been diagnosed with gout, a couple of things make it more likely for gout to come back again. So again, recent injury, surgeries, alcohol, overeating, and certain medications that cause the blood levels of urate to go up. So switching gears a little bit, family history does play a role. It's pretty common that people that have a family member with gout end up getting it themselves as well. And for some of the medications that tend to increase the risk of gout, some diuretics, that's a kind of blood pressure medication that causes the body to flush out extra water. Cyclosporine, aspirin, and niacin can increase it. And mentioned already stress and trauma and surgery. But gout is one of those things that a lot of people hear about, especially reduce red meat, which is true. But the way that our culture and society is, it's not always clear to my gout-suffering patients what exactly red meat is. So just for initial clarity, red meat basically is the meat of a four-legged hoofed animal. Can be a pig, it can be a cow, it can be a goat. And people look at me a little funny. They say, wait a second, pork is a white meat. What are you talking about? That's not a red meat. Actually, that's one of those little advertising tricks that got played on the American public because they had such advertising campaigns as pork, the other white meat. It really functions in the body as a red meat, but the white meat term in that case just implies that when you are cooking the stuff, it doesn't have quite a dark color. it's more of a tan color as opposed to the darker color of cooking a steak, for example. Because it is a four-legged mammal, it still functions in the body as a red meat, and especially for those that are suffering from gout, generally speaking, eating more plants and getting away from meat, generally speaking, will also help with the preventing the gout flares, as well as avoiding alcohol as well. I've had many people that came in with a gout flare after, say, New Year's Eve, and they had a little to drink, they had a party, they had some hamburgers or something, and next thing you know, they're in hobbling, unable to walk with pain. Not a very fun way to start the new year. So people that eat the most red meat, poultry, and fish tend to have much higher uric acid levels and a greater risk of developing gout than people who eat the least amount of meats in general. And compared to people who are at their ideal weight, overweight men, in other words, BMI, body mass index, between 25 to 29.9 have double the risk of developing gout. And for those with a BMI at 35, which is well into the obesity category, the risk is nearly tripled. So weight management, weight control can be very, very helpful for those with gout. But don't do those starvation diets, because starving yourself also increases the risk of a flare. So how can you have a diet pattern that will help you with weight loss, that will actually suppress the likelihood of developing gout, when you're saying, oh my gosh, what you're saying, I can't eat all the things that I love, no alcohol, less meat, what's going on here? Well, it turns out that some folks have already put together a lot of cool things regarding specific foods and how they can be used, not just to feed yourself, but also to reduce the risk of gout at the same time. There's another couple of things to mention before I go into that. Lead levels. So there's a lot of communities where there is lead in the pipes or lead in other food products. Those who are fans of the paleo diet may not be aware that, as it recommends oftentimes things like bone broth, there have been some studies that came out exposing some of those broths as actually containing lead levels, which might not be the best thing when you're trying not to get a gout flare. So there's some association between elevated lead levels and uric acid levels in the blood. Alrighty, and then also a little bit of things with regard to drinking water can be very helpful as well, just as a general lifestyle kind of thing to prevent gout flares. So the same strategies that we use to prevent kidney stones. Hint, I've also got a video on preventing kidney stones, check it out. For example, drinking 2 liters or more of water every day can also reduce your risk of developing gout as well. There seems to be something very helpful with flushing the body, flushing out the extra acids, and helping the body detox in a way from that. So the folks that were drinking 2 or more liters of water and water-based beverages, such as green tea type of things, had lower risk of uric acid kidney stones in the gout patients. And then there's some interesting other things about the association between cherries and gout. Dr. Barnard reported on an intriguing but unconfirmed report that having 9 ounces of Bing cherries a day, or about 45 cherries, was associated with a big reduction in uric acid levels. So he was saying we need more studies. And so, where do I go when I look for more studies? But one of my favorite doctors, Dr. Greger at nutritionfacts.org. So popping over to his resource for a moment. And you guys can all see these resources afterwards in the comment section. And now in my new docraho.com website, I'm starting to put the references linked in the references section there. So we've already talked about the animal products, but I did not specifically mention what is it about the meats and so forth that is actually causing people problems with this gout. It all has to do with purines that are coming from the animals. Short version is that some people just can't handle those purines very well. Their metabolism doesn't break it down. And also we talked about alcohol and all the high fructose corn syrup and stuff. The other thing that is high in purines is yeast, and so folks with gout may also not want to overconsume too much yeast as well. But purines, basically it's a little bit of building blocks of protein, I guess is the way of saying it. So when you have these animal origin purines, a fancy word for a little bit of something that's in the stuff that causes you pain, is a short way of putting it. Basically, it forms little needle-like crystals in the blood, and when these crystals in the joints, such as the toe, it's hi Karen, and basically it causes that swelling. So if this was a toe, and obviously it's not a toe, it's a finger, but the swelling is at the very base of that toe as well. And when it causes that thing, sometimes the little sharp needle-like crystals actually deposit in the joints, and you can see them later called tophi. Anyway, it's a fancy word for what doctors call that gunky stuff that collects in the joints. Sometimes we can diagnose gout based on symptoms like a guy at the right age comes in with a hot, swollen toe, looks like gout, smells like gout, doesn't really smell like gout, doesn't really smell, but basically it fits all the parameters. We get a uric acid level. The uric acid is above 5.5, and therefore gout, especially if it responds to the usual things like we hit it hard with some NSAIDs, such as sometimes we'll use colchicine, sometimes we'll use high-dose Motrin, naproxen, sometimes steroids, especially if they got a stomach problem and they can't tolerate the naproxen or the Motrin, that sort of thing. So that's part of the initial diagnosis and such. Once you're kind of getting the picture of what's going on with the patient. Occasionally, other joints can be affected too, by the way. So sometimes I've had people with recurrent ankle pain, for example, and they get a hot, swollen ankle, or a knee. They get a hot, swollen knee. In those cases, sometimes you got to do a joint aspiration, like you kind of poke a needle in it and pull some stuff out just to make sure, because occasionally some of these other joints can get a bacterial infection, which can kind of sort of mimic the gout. So again, another reason why this website is educational only. Please stop by and talk to your personal doctor to get hands-on look and make sure that you don't have anything more serious going on when it comes to things like gout. So medication. So there's a few medications that we use for gout. Now, the most common one is actually allopurinol. I've got a few patients that are still on that medication. Once in a while, that one doesn't really work that great, and so there's a couple of more further expensive kinds of medications that can be used. Anyway, again, things to talk about directly with your primary care doctor. But the thing that's most fun about gout is it so easily responds to diet and lifestyle measures. So, in addition to having lots of water and losing weight while not starving yourself and avoiding the alcohol, those are kind of the big triggers, and also avoiding the meat products that trigger this stuff. There's a protective effect of certain foods, and I've got some demonstration stuff here. So these are a type of beans. I believe these ones are like a mung dal kind of thing. So lentils, beans, and just for fun, more examples of the variety of beans that are out there. Beans are a really, really, really versatile food. There's a bazillion different varieties of them out there. Just grabbed some from our kitchen. So beans, lentils are very protective, and they think that the aspect of it that's particularly effective is purine-rich plant foods. So in other words, when this little bitty thing comes from animals, not so good in the body. When it comes from the plants, it actually dampens the effect and is protective. There are a lot of folks that play around with things such as tart cherry juice. I'm just holding up to show as an example of cherry juice. So cherries fight inflammation and they tend to lower the uric acid levels. Hibiscus tea was also studied, and again, this is just another example of, there's a hibiscus flower on there. It's just that bright purpley, dark colored thing. So the hibiscus tea tends to be this beautiful pink or purple color for the most part. Hibiscus tea tends to lower the uric acid levels as well. And people in general that have cauliflower, mushrooms, peas, beans, asparagus, and lentils, those were the ones that were particularly protective. I just didn't have everything assembled with me, sorry. Go visit your grocery store, you can see plenty of examples of all these things. And those are particularly protective. And then basically having a plant-based diet is also associated with having a much lower uric acid level. Getting rid of sodas, another common thing to watch out for, can be very helpful for reducing the risk of gout as well. And in general, people that are eating more alkaline, meaning vegetarian style of diet, we're able to not just not imbibe the things that cause the uric acid levels to come up, but their bodies were better able to flush it. In other words, better able to get it out of the body altogether. There was one trial that they found in only a few days of switching the diet pattern around from whatever they were doing before to I think in the study was a vegetarian diet. They experienced a 93% decline in the risk of uric acid crystals forming. So anyway, good stuff, fun stuff. So there's another plant in particular that has been shown to help decrease those uric acid levels, cilantro. So that is a common ingredient, I think, in some Mexican and Thai foods, as well as anybody that just happens to like cilantro. And then we talked about cherries, talking about dropping the uric acid through 45 cherries a day, if you want to get technical on one of the studies. But that's one of the reasons why sometimes people will go to one of these adjuncts, like a little bit of tart cherry juice. By the way, the tart cherry juice does also contain melatonin, so if it's taken in the evening time, it can help with sleep as well. So small benefit for that. So the cherries tend to be very anti-inflammatory. The cherry juice has, or the cherries in general, have something in them that acts very similar to Motrin. So it is in fact anti-inflammatory just on their own. So for the anti-inflammatory effect, I believe it was the Bing cherries that were the most effective at that. And then the tart cherries were slightly less than in particular in that section. Would the dried cherries work? David, yeah, I think David, yes, I think the dried cherries would work as well. So part of it would also be a little bit of experimenting if you want to play around with it. Not everywhere has fresh cherries all the time, of course. They tend to be a very seasonally peaked product. Another thing is the frozen cherries to consider. And frozen cherries are usually easy to find year-round, and if I remember right, the active ingredient survives the freezing pretty well. And so the Bing cherries or the tart cherries, the Bing cherries for inflammation, and the tart cherries I think had a little extra gout protective measures from my memory. Alrighty, so C-reactive protein levels dropped in a study where people ate 45 cherries a day with other anti-inflammatory benefit remaining even a month after they stopped eating the cherries. So that was the last bit from Dr. Greger's summary. There's a lot of great presentations in there on gout. In particular, I was kind of fascinated by some of the things with how it is that we end up getting this thing called gout in the first place. I think there was some stuff for kind of evolutionary things in there. But that's kind of buried in the gout chapter, so I don't want to go into that in this very second. So, any other questions on this topic tonight? And one of the things, as mentioned before, that is so much fun about gout as a topic is not only is it something that's really easy to understand, but also it is one small area in which making a few simple lifestyle changes can actually make a huge difference in quality of life. It's always fun having people that had gout come back and say basically how good they're feeling and how few flares. In fact, usually it gets down to nothing depending on what people end up doing. But just a little bit better understanding of what this thing is and things you can do proactively to reduce the risk of it. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.